In the first season, we met Lloyd in a completely fantastical world where magic exists. And now the genius engineer has found himself in a world of magic, where the possibilities are not limited only by the laws of physics. In the new world, Lloyd decided that poor Yvette quiet and happy life. But it was not so. He became a bastard, whose family will soon go bankrupt. Against the background of such events, he had to use all the skills that would raise the family from their knees. In this, he was helped by an unknown system, which he received immediately after getting into this wonderful world. The guy continued to do impossible feats, and eventually he became very interested in the Queen, which made the hero regret that he stood out so much, because now the Queen would not tada such a talent just to live quietly. She used the guy for seemingly impossible tasks, and he easily coped with them and replenished the number of his workers. The result of the first season, even Satan himself was interested in the guy, because in his eyes, Lloyd was almost as scary as he is. Anyway guys, glad to see you again on my channel. This is the second season of the manhwa system of the almighty designer. Let's collect 500 likes, and then I'll make a sequel to this story. As you have already seen, I have changed the format of the video, and now I'm doing 1000% to please you with the video. So please write your opinion in the comments, because I critically need to know how much of my efforts you came to like. Anyway, enough stalling, it's time to get started. Enjoy the show. Outside the weather was clear. The man was telling Lloyd angrily about the beauty of nature, fanatically telling him that people long for the ability of gods to create things out of nothing. He also noted that when he created his first garden, he felt like a real god. Lloyd listened intently to the old man, who in his opinion was incredibly dedicated to his work, and for that reason, the hero should make sure to get the most out of the old man. The old man said that they should go to the meeting, and advised Lloyd to just wait, because in his opinion, as Lloyd wanted, the hero didn't know anything at all. The boy looked at the happy old man and couldn't help but smile, because he wasn't going to sit idly by. A team of the hero's little pets was summoned. The beaver began to stomp furiously on the ground and say bong, while Lloyd spoke admiringly about how it was time for them to play. Podong and Bebong were in the arena, and Lloyd gesticulated wildly to the pet to use the thunderbolt. Beaver was defeated by a mysterious force. While Xavier already ran to his master, the hero continued to play with his pets. While his servant ran at breakneck speed, something terrible seemed to have happened. Lloyd was defeated by his pet when he missed a direct attack to the stomach. He twisted in pain and realized in ecstasy that this was the most beautiful thing that could be on Earth. Right now, he was getting money just by doing nothing. A servant interrupted his master's joy with the news that the Queen had arrived. This news did not seem to please the hero, who had been overjoyed just a moment before. Lloyd took out a huge desk, he put a large pile of papers on it, and pretended to puzzle over an unsolvable problem. The Queen watched this picture with a note of incredulity. The boy pretended to notice the Queen, and immediately fell to his knees before the owner of these lands, who made a serious face, for it would be obvious to anyone that Lloyd was just having fun. This realization made the boy swallow his tongue. The Queen explained that Lloyd was wrong to think Vicomte was an idiot, because not everyone could rise to such a position through hard work. Lloyd was sweating profusely. He assumed the old man had denounced him. Shortly before, the man came to the Queen with a report. He said that the dragon statue in the center of the garden and the boat that was created to watch it. He didn't understand how they were made, but the problem was that the speed of the boat was too fast, and he didn't know how to solve this problem. The Queen assumed that the man wanted to abandon the project, but he said that a young man, who was actually Lloyd, offered a solution to the problem. The solution was to build a step in front of the launch, install a clapper door at the end of the step, and once the boat was in, the clapper door could be closed, which would lower the water level. And when the water level was back to normal, the clapper door could be opened, allowing the boat to leave. The man said that thanks to Lloyd, they were able to solve a lot of problems, but as soon as the problem was solved, the hero pretended that he had nothing to do with it, and that it was all the Visconti's fault. The man said that Lloyd was a great man for giving up his vacation to help them. In real time, the Queen was standing over Lloyd, who had fallen. The guy was trying to figure out how to get out of the situation when the Queen ordered Lloyd to raise his head and lower his ass, threatening to kick him if he didn't. Lloyd, with an incredulous face, waited to see what the queen would say, but she looked at him with her soul-piercing gaze. The girl was proud and said that she was incredibly pleased with what Lloyd had done and asked him to keep it up. Lloyd was shocked by this outcome, as he had expected something completely different. The queen and her escort began to leave. Lloyd was immeasurably glad that the queen had not realized that he was just fooling around. Time passed, but the construction of the huge garden continued unabated, and Lloyd did not waste his time either, for he did not know when he would have the opportunity to play so much. More time passed, spring came, the garden was finally finished, and there was a magnificent climax. In honor of the opening, many people gathered inside. The queen sat upstairs watching her subjects. The old man proudly told someone with admiration that her kingdom was the best in the world. Lloyd began to understand why this garden was necessary, to show everyone the superiority of the Magentano kingdom. Lloyd noticed his subordinate and asked why he was looking at the cookies and not eating them. Xavier replied that he thought Lloyd was very unlucky. The hero was angry and asked why he was talking nonsense about nothing. Xavier started to explain, saying that every time something happens at such banquets, it is his master's bad luck. Lloyd was about to disagree, but suddenly there was a loud bang that attracted the attention of everyone. The source of the sound turned out to be the dragon's head, which had fallen from its body. The queen didn't seem happy about what had happened, and the old man who had done all this was horrified by the sight. Lloyd could not believe his eyes, for the statue could not have collapsed. Xavier warned his master to prepare to flee. Xavier's face was frightened. Looking at the bones, the hero did not understand what was happening. The dragon bones began to emit a huge amount of purple energy. Its influence was so great that even from space, the vortex created by this power could be seen. The huge skull dragon looked fiercely at the statue and began to think that before he was decapitated by the girl, he had transferred his soul into these bones, and it was only now that he could finally settle down. After the bone body was fully restored, there was a terrible soul-tearing roar, and the dragon immediately flew at the statue, smashing it with a swipe of his paw. The bone monster immediately turned towards the people. All present were swallowed by a primal fear. The monster roared with all its might, making everyone's body shudder. The queen ordered the people to run away, or they would all die. The girl went to attack the monster, which by its mere presence caused fear in the surrounding people. The dragon did not stand still and swung its paw, causing the queen and her subjects to be thrown far back. Even though the dragon was still getting used to his body, all humans were just little ants to him. The enemy screamed again, raising his huge krill that covered the sky. The queen was well aware that she could do nothing against this monster alone. The girl turned and began to call Lloyd's name, thinking he was the only one who could find a way out of this situation. Not that Lloyd himself answered, he just ran away as if he had never run before. The queen was completely overwhelmed. Now she had one last hope left, namely Xavier, whom she began to call. But even he was with Lloyd and ran away with him, leaving the queen alone on the battlefield. Now twice defeated, the queen was left alone with the terrifying monster. Xavier and Lloyd kept running, not even looking back, jumping over the tables and just running forward. It seemed that Lloyd had gained superhuman speed, so fast were they running. Xavier reminded Lloyd that they wouldn't get the money if they ran, but he called the servant a money maniac and said that lives weren't worth a few coins. Xavier seemed shocked by the reaction, but decided to stop, surprising Lloyd this time. Xavier explained that if they left the monster, the danger would affect their entire kingdom, and he had to stop it. Lloyd continued to run away, saying that Xavier could do nothing, but he noticed that his master's feet would never stop in the face of danger. The servant told Lloyd to run as far away as he could, and he would hold the dragon back until he died. Lloyd did not seem to want this outcome. It was then that the dragon prepared a terrible magical attack, attacking the queen and destroying everything in its path. His attacks were followed by explosions of unprecedented power, and the queen could only fly away from the shockwave. Vran continued to attack everything around him with his mana beam. The situation became too dangerous when the queen had no way to dodge. It was at this incredibly dangerous moment that Xavier appeared and hit the monster with his attack. The enemy didn't take any damage, but thanks to this attack, The beam was deflected, saving the queen. The dragon saw Xavier as an annoying fly and began to attack him, while the servant dodged countless attacks from the rag, realizing that if one of them hit him, he would be dead. The queen did not stand idly by and entered the fray. Xavier repeated his attack, and already 2 attacks had reached the dragon's body. It was a terrible thing. Not even that the attacks failed to injure the enemy, but that he had finally gotten used to his body. The dragon flapped its wings and flew into the sky. Seeing this image, fear was written on the faces of Xavier and the queen. The dragon began to fly and destroyed everything in the area. Along with the queen, the servant retreated. Suddenly, the evil Lloyd appeared on the battlefield and threw the beaver right into the fray. The hero's pet ate the nut and returned to its original huge form. Such a huge carcass was able to stop the dragon, and the dragon was pinned to the ground with great speed. At this point, Lloyd was able to grab the queen along with Xavier, and together they began to fly through the air, while the dragon couldn't realize what had just happened. The guys were right above the huge creature. Lloyd, with a very confident look, asked Goman to start the poop bombardment. The pet was embarrassed, but with the help of another pet, the all-important mission began. Countless balls of feces fell from the sky, and the dragon began to take their blows. Although he was not physically harmed by such an attack, he was mentally angry beyond words. The enemy began to shout that he would destroy the heroes. When the queen asked about the plan, Lloyd explained that he was improvising. Together, they were able to rise above the clouds, hoping to escape the enemy, but the dragon followed them, and Lloyd decided to take the beast to a being stronger than himself, the Dragon King himself. The Dragon King, as described in the novel, was a kind and stern dragon who loved humans. As Lloyd ran from his enemy, he thought that the king would not tolerate such foolish behavior. Lloyd asked how far Napple was, which made the queen wonder, because if you traveled to that place at that speed, it would take all day. This information broke Lloyd's mind. By that time, the enemy was already close and ready to crush the boys with his strong jaws, and now he was clenching his teeth with all his might. But by a miracle, the team of suicide bombers managed to survive. Lloyd realized that with a racer like that on their tail, there was no way they could outrun him all day. Xavier asked if their problem would be solved if they got to that place, to which Lloyd replied that it would. With that, the servant prepared to strike with his aura, and used the aura blast to attack the dragon. The dragon was calm, for such an attack would not even scratch it. But to his surprise, the servant's attack managed to pierce the dragon's wing. Thanks to this trick, the boys managed to fall a little behind. Lloyd asked Xavier to continue. At that time, the enemy was beyond furious at such an attack, so Lloyd went to the queen by name and asked her to lend him the sword. The queen was offended, but the man didn't listen to her and took the sword. Lloyd told Xavier that they had to strike in such a way that the enemy would not be able to dodge. The hero also began to charge the sword with aura, and with a fierce expression on his face, he said only one word: explosion. The dragon was shocked by such a show, and the queen didn't realize what was happening. By that time, Lloyd and Xavier's combined attack was already flying towards the enemy. Lloyd's attack hit the target but bounced off, and Xavier's attack was no exception, causing no visible damage. Lloyd didn't understand what was happening. It felt like the enemy was getting stronger. Suddenly, Lloyd received a blow from behind, and then fell down without moving. The queen ordered the servant to lift a part of the hero's body, and together they held the guy like a torpedo missile. The dragon was already close, and the queen ordered Lloyd to scream with all his might, and then she gave him a good kick in the ass. Lloyd made a face of pain and misunderstanding and screamed. The scream was so strong that even the dragon was stunned for a moment. Thanks to this unusual trick, they were able to increase their distance from the enemy. The queen said that Lloyd's face was incredibly helpful, and he shed a few tears with a devastated but seemingly proud look. The dragon began to realize that Lloyd was the one who had saved the queen from being poisoned, and the one who had stopped the Mastodon army. The dragon himself was terrified the moment he saw that face. He didn't fucking understand how a living thing could look so disgusting. The dragon had come to his senses, and now he was determined to take revenge on both of his enemies at the same time. The queen angrily slapped poor Loik's ass, and he screamed and squealed from the pain he felt. The dragon did not fall for this trick again. This time, he closed his eyes to avoid seeing this horrible image. Xavier told the queen to cover his ears with manna and told Lloyd to use the screams of hell, but he objected and ordered the servant never to call his singing that again. Lloyd began to sing, or rather to emit the very screams of hell, but the dragon was able to stand his ground, for this time he also covered his ears. With an angry look, the queen threw Lloyd down, saying that the thing was no longer useful. Lloyd realized that the plan to use the Dragon King had failed and that they had no choice but to defeat the dragon themselves. Suddenly, the image of the queen, who had once said that there was no tailbone in the dragon's bones, appeared in his mind. Now Lloyd knew for sure that even such a seemingly invincible opponent had a weakness. They flew at top speed, and the dragon kept catching up with them. The dragon thought he was getting stronger as time went on. He closed the distance to the humans, and thinking he had become a creature that had surpassed nature, he was ready to eat the boys. But Lloyd was not going to give up so easily. He ordered Goman to use web missiles, and the dragon was enveloped in a web. The enemy began to scream that Lloyd was only making trouble for him. Suddenly, the dragon realized that he had missed the men. He couldn't understand where they had disappeared to, but the guys were already on top. Lloyd shouted that he should attack the fourth tailbone from the pelvis, and Xavier followed the command and directed his attack right at the place the hero had recognized. This bone was artificial, so the attack failed. The dragon howled in pain, and Xavier continued his attack. By that time, the queen had already finished preparing her attack, and said that Lloyd had told her that this bone was made from the bones of the Imperator whale. The guy apologized, and called it a rational economy of materials and effort. The queen acknowledged Lloyd's opinion, and struck a blow that destroyed the bone. Lloyd was completely satisfied with the result, and the dragon lost its tail and began to fall to the ground. Lloyd lay on the bed in his underwear, and said that they hadn't been home for a long time. Xavier said that Lloyd's negative energy was 10 times worse than usual, which pissed off the guy who got it from almost everyone he met. Xavier apologized for his words and said that the question of clothes should be put aside for now. He asked when Lloyd was going to address the Countess and the Count as a father. The boy hadn't expected such a question, and Xavier added that even if he wanted to call them his parents, he had no right to do so, so he couldn't understand why Lloyd, who had the right to do so, would address them by their titles. Xavier ended the conversation by saying that he had said too much, and Lloyd thought about it, because the servant had lost his parents and must be sad. Looking at the portraits of Xavier's dead parents, the hero asked what they looked like. The servant was surprised by the question, and explained that Lloyd was asking because he was really curious. Lloyd said with a very light-hearted look that he was really interested in the servant's parents. The dragon that fell from the sky landed right on the ground, leaving a huge footprint in the ground behind him. He continued to lie down, but he still tried to stand up, even though the loss of his tail caused his body to lose its balance. By that time, a huge beaver had already flown down from the sky and pinned the dragon to the ground. Lloyd used the maximum power of the explosion, but missed, and all the energy flew into the sky. Xavier also prepared his attack and hit the enemy hard. Lloyd made a horrified face and used a supercharge, sending a huge blast of energy from his hand that went straight for the dragon. Xavier continued to attack with all his might, and Lloyd was also doing his best. His mana heart skill had increased, and the queen had arrived on the battlefield, ready to deal a decisive blow to the enemy. She attacked with a sword with a huge amount of energy, and this attack was successful because the hard bone that seemed invincible began to crack. The dragon howled in pain and rage, while Lloyd rejoiced that their combined attacks were working. Lloyd got a new skill option. As the dragon's devouring of his mana heart put his power into it, the guy didn't pay attention to the hint, as they were now attacking a world-scale monster together. Back to the dialogue with Xavier, he couldn't understand why Lloyd was interested in such things. He didn't understand why he was interested, because the servant wasn't his friend. Suddenly, behind Lloyd's back, a bone fell from the dragon's body. Xavier noticed it and immediately rushed to the place of the collision and covered his master with his body. The hero looked up and saw a horrible image of his servant spewing a huge amount of blood from his mouth. Xavier flew away with the bone, destroying the trees around him. He immediately flew through the forest and landed at a pond where he plunged under the water with tremendous speed. The dragon stood up and began to scream with rage. He began to draw some of his boast, and a moment later, his body was restored. Lloyd was incredibly saddened by the death of his comrade. He began to scream the servant's name, while the dragon was already ready to crush the guy like a bug. At the last moment, the queen intervened and saved the hero. She started to say that Lloyd should pull himself together, and as always, think of a way to win. She said that he had to think of a way to save Xavier. Lloyd didn't know what to do. Xavier's mana was gone the moment he was hit. He didn't know how to heal something like that. As the dragon stared at the humans and Xavier sank to the bottom of the lake, he was still alive and decided to collect his mana. He decided to expand it and drive it into each other, but his aura began to fade and he assumed that was the end of him. As he sank to the bottom, Xavier's only thought was that it was his duty to save Lloyd. At that moment, the queen and the hero on her shoulders were fleeing from the dragon, who was quickly catching up to them. Lloyd pondered what he should have done earlier. He seemed to have fallen into despair. While Xavier believed that he had to save his master, Lloyd believed that he had to save his servant. Xavier clenched his limbs in anger and pain, while the hero was determined to save his servant. Lloyd asked for permission to jump off the queen's back, and without waiting for an answer, he did so. Xavier regained consciousness and was anxious to get out of the water, for he was obliged to save his master. It was in the lake that the two men who had tried to save each other met, each realizing at last that they were true friends. Their hands were only a few inches apart, and eventually their hands were intertwined. Lloyd tried to tell Xavier to absorb his mana. The Oni understood each other without words, and the servant began to absorb the mana. By this time, the dragon was in a rage. He was about to finish off the queen, but suddenly that round thing started flying towards him at great speed, finally hitting him with enough force to deflect the monster's head. The dragon's attack flew past the rabbit, and on the other side of the lake where it hit, there was a huge explosion. Xavier couldn't understand one thing about Lloyd's mana, namely that it seemed foreign to him. He even thought that this mana could be called something outside the rules of this world. At that time, Lloyd's pet did not stand still either and used his crowning attack of fecal bombardment. The dragon saw the projectiles of poop flying towards him, and this time he decided to dodge. He was instantly behind the frightened bird. At that moment, Xavier realized that he was unable to control this mana. The other pets also decided to join the fight. The girl pet flew straight towards the dragon, while the monster itself was covered in black mist, and the queen took this opportunity to get close enough to strike. But just before she struck, her body stopped, as if the queen had been struck by lightning and seemed to have a look of despair on her face. The dragon did not hesitate, and with a swing of his crest threw the queen away. Xavier begged his master's forgiveness for not being able to accept such power, and for not being able to stay at his side. As Lloyd seemed to suffocate under the dammed water, Xavier cried out, and his mana began to return. A message popped up, saying that after seeing Lloyd's face, Xavier realized that he was beyond causality. At that moment, the queen flew straight to the ground at great speed, and was picked up by a pet bird at the last moment. As Xavier's mana began to fail, Lloyd's pets were ready to accept their terrible fate, and the dragon prepared to end their battle with a decisive attack. Lloyd was about to suffocate when he received a message that every cell in Xavier's body was now functioning as a mana heart, causing images of mana to appear and giant wings to sprout from the servant's back. Everyone on the battlefield felt the energy, and the pets were delighted by the sight they saw as Xavier climbed out of the water, holding Lloyd's body, releasing the water he had swallowed from his body. The dragon was shocked as he couldn't keep up with Xavier's movements. The servant threw Lloyd's body to the ground and swung his blade in an incredibly elegant and mature manner. The dragon didn't have time to see anything, but a moment later, the monster's body was covered with a huge number of cuts, and it simply began to turn to ashes. The remains of the dragon began to fall to the ground, evenly cut into cubes. Lloyd was shocked at the strength of his servant. Xavier was now the strongest man of the new Grandmaster. Lloyd turned to his servant. There was a small silence between them, which was interrupted by the hero saying that from now on Xavier would be in charge of all soaring tasks. The servant was incredibly angry to hear such words right after such a terrible battle. but he calmed down immediately because Lloyd is always like that, and the servants' pets rushed into the hero's arms. Later, the hero bowed to Corleva and received a message from the system. Now the number of fates that saved Lloyd was more than 3,100,000. It turned out that the number does not directly depend on the hero. For example, if the hero saved some knight, the number can be higher because the same knight can save more people. The system explained that the life Lloyd saves does not only affect that person. Lloyd said that he would be happy if he could turn 1 DP into 1,000 gold, but the system told him to forget about it. Xavier turned to the Lord and said that the bone dragon wouldn't die, and asked what they should do with the pile of bones. The bones started to move. Lloyd said to do nothing and let the dragon recover. Lloyd's face took on a charm of its own, and he said that this monster could be used for many things. The enemy began to rise from the ashes, and Lloyd's face took on a serious color. The dragon began to scream with great force. The system told him that taking control of the dragon had failed and suggested that he cleanse his soul, which Lloyd agreed to, and the guy's mind began to move into the dragon's consciousness. Realizing that the dragon contained the soul of a mage, the man looked in the direction where he saw a man kneeling. He received information about this man, namely that his name was Targa, and that he was a black magician. The man started the conversation by saying that he was born with cursed mana. He talked about how people had abused him and his family. His own mother told him that he was the cause of all their problems. The man continued to tell his disturbing story, but Lloyd interrupted the conversation and turned to Targa. He asked with a completely indifferent face. And, after that, he struck a powerful blow directly on the man's face, from which he instantly disappeared. By this time in the real world, the hero was unconscious, but the dragon began to transform. Now the protagonist could control the bone dragon. The system told Lloyd that he should greet the dragon who had just found himself, and that their future relationship would depend on his first words. Lloyd made a horrified face and said, "I am your father." The dragon immediately began to charge a mana beam. Xavier and the queen prepared for battle, but the dragon fired a projectile into the air, and a giant heart appeared in its place. The dragon touchingly called Lloyd his daddy. The queen's face was filled with disgust, but Lloyd reached forward and stroked the dragon's head, saying that he would give it a name. He said that the dragon was not like a zombie and was a Grardi creature, so Lloyd named it Yong Yong, which means dragon dragon, and the allies, including the system itself, thought the name was really lame. Lloyd himself was happy about the power he had gotten his hands on, while the allies still thought what a cheesy name the guy had come up with. The queen thought about Lloyd. She thought about the fact that he was now a man capable of destroying the whole world in one morning. The queen was upset, for now the boy was beyond her power. After a while, it was a sunny day outside. The queen began to speak to the people. She apologized for her mistake and promised to take full responsibility for the tragedy. She also began to talk about who had avoided the disaster, but saw Lloyd, who begged the queen not to mention him in the speech. The queen was touched by this behavior. The most powerful man on the planet dreams of being rich and living in the middle of nowhere. The queen found him annoying and blurted out to the whole kingdom that everyone was saved thanks to Lloyd. The hero was shocked that the queen had tricked him, so she looked him right in the eye and stuck out her tongue as if to mock him. Lloyd was shocked by the queen's behavior. It was evening, and the beautiful blue moon illuminated everything outside. At that time, Lloyd was overjoyed with the news that he would receive 2 billion gold for the restoration. Xavier reminded him that the lights were almost out, but Lloyd nagged that they were almost out, and that was what mattered. Xavier looked at Lloyd, who was as happy as a child to be able to live like the Emperor himself. Xavier asked the hero if he was a god, but the hero immediately dismissed his thoughts, because if Lloyd was a god, he would not have created such a face for himself. Xavier asked where the real Lloyd was, and the hero thought about it, but answered the truth that he didn't know what was wrong with the owner of the body. He explained that when he woke up, he was already in the body. Xavier asked if the hero had stolen Lloyd's body on purpose, and he confessed that he had, and the servant asked for a lullaby to go to sleep. Lloyd was surprised that he was believed, and Xavier told him that the hero makes a bastard face when he lies, but when he tells the truth, there is always a feeling that the guy feels his vulnerability. After these words, the hero remained silent. Suddenly, someone knocked on the room. Then the door opened, and there was a man. Xavier told Lloyd that he couldn't feel any mana from the old man, and that he probably wasn't a living being. The man told him that he was the original spirit of the dragon that Lloyd had defeated, and asked why that spirit was looking for them. The man in the dragon's name ordered Lloyd to go to hell and save Frontera's original soul, but the man just fell asleep and said he wouldn't do it. The old man started crying and begging Lloyd to help him, but he was so indestructible. The old man said that if Lloyd would save his soul, he would let him become a member of the Dragon King. The hero seemed a little interested, but when he turned around, it was clear that he was damned interested in hearing about the benefits of membership. Thank you all for watching this video. I'm glad there are people who watched my video to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will keep trying to make good videos. Good luck and all the best. See you next time.